get this motility going, get this contraction happening, and then we want to maintain it for as long as there is going to be contents in the stomach, and then we have to coordinate that activity of the stomach with what's going on in the intestines, because as we said, the intestines can only really process a few milliliters at a time. So there's three things that we're going to be looking at, and those three things are listed here, these three different kind of little boxes that you see. But wait, if you want kind of the overall big picture, everything, all three parts all at once, there you go, it's in the one big picture. But as you know, we like to break things down into the smaller components and talk about them one at a time, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look first of all at the cephalic phase, then we're going to talk about the gastric phase and the intestinal phase. The name of the phases is telling you where the trigger is coming from.
Okay.
So for the cephalic phase, what does cephalic tell us about?
The head.
The head, okay. So this means that the trigger for gastric function, the trigger of what's going on in our stomach is going to be coming from something to do with the head. Then in the gastric phase of gastric function, the trigger for our gastric function is going to be originating in the stomach itself. And then in the intestinal phase, the trigger for gastric function is coming from the intestines. Okay, so the name is telling you where that initial trigger for gastric function is happening, but the result is always going to be what is the stomach doing, what's happening in the stomach. As we said before, the only two things that we can change and modify when it comes to the digestive system is what?
Motility
Motility
and secretion.
and secretion. So the amount of contraction and relaxation that's happening, and the amount of secretion that we're producing or that we're generating in that substance. So those are the only two things that we're going to be able to have an effect on. And we see that here in our first phase, the cephalic phase of gastric function. So this phase of gastric function, we're going to get the stomach up and running even before there's any food in the stomach at all. So in the in the cephalic phase, this is triggered by thinking about food, or smelling food, or I guess hearing food. I guess if you have some way of trying it, maybe hearing something like frying nicely on the whatever. But all of these ideas, thinking about food, that's going to then send stimuli down to the stomach to get the stomach secretions going, to get that gastric juice up and running. You don't want to have a bolus arriving in the stomach and there's no gastric juice there to greet it. You already want to be up and running so that the stomach is ready to go and we can start that mechanical and chemical digestion as soon as that bolus reaches the stomach. Okay, so when you think about food or when you smell food and you're very hungry, your stomach is empty, what does your stomach often start to do? Oh, now it starts to gurgle and like churn. Oh yeah, I could eat that right now, whatever you're pulling in from, hot dogs from over there, or noodles, or whatever you got coming in. Oh, it smells so good. And so now well, yeah, that's the cephalic phase that is being triggered. Because now your stomach is getting ready, because you're thinking about food, you're probably going to go find some at some point in the near future. And so that's going to then, you want to have your stomach be ready to receive that bolus. We'll also see then, again, that those olfactory centers, even food that's in your mouth, so you're tasting that food, again, as a trigger for your gastric function. That's going to be using the vagus nerve to send that information, to send those signals to increase that gastric motility. That's that kind of churning and like gurgling that you're feeling. That's the contractions of the wall of the stomach. But because there's nothing in your stomach right now, because you're hungry, you haven't actually eaten anything yet, you're hearing that kind of gurgling of a little bit of fluid that is in there. And then of course we want to increase that gastric juice secretion as well. All right, so we've got our cephalic phase. Just if you like pictures that are going to be a little bit better for us, we're going to see that we start with our cephalic phase. So in our head, sight, taste, smell, thought, whatever of the food, and then using that vagus nerve, that's then going to trigger that gastric function. More gastric secretion, and then a little bit more of that contraction that's happening. Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I've never heard that piece of advice before, that you shouldn't chew gum if you're hungry, because it's actually going to make you maybe more hungry. But you're absolutely right, that if you are chewing gum, you are going to be triggering this gastric phase of gastric function because there's flavors that you're tasting, and you're thinking about, you have that mastication that's going on, so there will be some triggering of that gastric function, and so it might, that's an interesting question, I've never thought about that before, you might actually feel more hungry if you have an empty stomach and are chewing gum. Good one, we should do some kind of scientific study about that. Ask my wife, yeah.
When she up?
But then she's gonna know the answer. I did not know about this before. I'll ask her, I'll see if it's all right, so we've got this gastric. All right, well, she is the smartest person. But there you go. Okay, let's talk about gastric function. So now we've got this bolus. So you've got the gastric function that's churning and it's going, but you're actually eating this food. So now that hot dog or that noodle or whatever you're eating is now going down into your stomach. Once you've eaten all of that food, you're now probably not smelling it anymore, you're not thinking about it anymore, you're not tasting it anymore. So the cephalic phase is going to stop. You're not going to have that signaling going down to the stomach anymore to have that motility, to have that secretion happen. And yet there's bolus in your stomach, right? All that food is now down in your stomach. You don't want to stop that motility and secretion. If anything, you want it to kind of ramp up a little bit to keep that digestion going. So we have to have another phase, we have to have the next step in order to be able to keep this gastric function moving along. And so we have our gastric phase. And this is now going to be triggered by that bolus that is now in your stomach. So you're not thinking about it anymore, cephalic phase is finished, but the bolus that is in the stomach is going to help to maintain that motility and secretion. As we're going to see with most of the control of our gastric functions and our digestive functions in the small and large intestine, it's going to involve two arms, two ways of being able to control this function. Nervous control through the nervous system, and hormone control by using different, as we will see, enterogastrones, or these hormones that are involved in digestion. So the first control is our nervous system control, and that's going to help keep the stomach active. So we have our stretch receptors in the wall of the stomach, because you've eaten all of this bolus is now in the stomach, stretching the wall of the stomach, and the composition of that food, the chemical composition of that bolus in the stomach is going to trigger chemoreceptors that are both the stretch receptors and the chemoreceptors will then trigger to the wall of the stomach to again help to maintain this vigorous peristalsis, this vigorous contraction, as well as continued secretion of our gastric juice. As we continue with this very vigorous peristalsis, this very vigorous contraction, then we have that chyme that is going to be moved from the stomach out into the duodenum, out into the small intestine. So as long as you have bolus in your stomach, you're going to be maintaining this gastric phase and maintaining this high activity of the stomach. So that's our nervous control. But we also have this hormonal control as well. So once again, because you've got bolus food in your stomach, there's going to be different types of compounds, like the proteins that are going to be found in the food that you're eating. And that's going to cause cells in the wall of the stomach to release this hormone called gastrin. You think gastrin, okay, well, where do you think gastrin is going to work? Gastrin is being released by the stomach, and if we're in the gastric phase, then gastrin is going to act where? On the stomach. So this is a hormone that is released into the bloodstream from the cells in the walls of the stomach, travels all around through your body, and then when it arrives back in your blood at the cells of your tissues in your stomach, it triggers them to say, oh, look at all this gastrin here, I better start producing more secretions. So gastrin is going to increase that gastric juice secretion. It's going to increase that gastric churning, and it's also, importantly, going to cause relaxation of that pyloric sphincter. Remember that pyloric sphincter is the distal sphincter at the end of the stomach. We want to be able to relax that so that the contents of the stomach is able to move out. So we've got this very active stomach process going on here, lots of motility, churning. We're able to control it through two different mechanisms, the nervous system, and now here with gastrin through this hormone, and we're both are going to be doing the same thing. increasing that motility and secretion. Tons of contraction, squishing and squeezing and mixing, and then also secretion of that gastric juice is happening quite a bit. Okay, so that's our gastric phase. Now, you've moved a bunch of that chyme from the stomach into the small intestine, into the duodenum. So now we have the intestinal phase. The problem here is that if you've got this stomach that is super duper active and it's contracting like crazy, you've got all this secretion that's going on, and you're trying to move all of this chyme out into the duodenum, the intestine is saying, whoa, I can only process like little bits at a time. I can't take that entire meal that you've just eaten and process it all right now. I can only do it in small little increments. So you're going to have to slow down over there, stomach, and just let me catch up a little bit. So the intestinal phase is going to begin when this chyme is moving initially from a little bit from the stomach into the intestines. What do you think the intestines are going to say to the stomach? When that chyme is moved from the stomach into the intestines, those intestines are now going to look back at the stomach and say, what? Yeah, like, calm down over there. Like, I get that there's a whole bunch of food there, and you're super excited for digestion, you're super excited for secretion, and that's great, but I can only process a little bit at a time. So you're going to need to calm down over there until I can process this. And once I process this that you've already sent me, then you can send me some more. So that's what the intestinal phase is going to be doing. It's essentially going to be trying to feed back to the stomach and say, calm down. Slow down motility and secretion so that we can catch up with this digestion in the intestines. So this is going to begin, as I said, when the chyme enters into the duodenum. Once again, we have stretch receptors that are going to be found there. So the wall of the intestine will stretch, and that's going to activate our sympathetic nervous system. Hey, sympathetic nervous system. Think back to last semester. Sympathetic nervous system does what to digestion? Slows it down. You're running away from a bear. We don't care about digesting your sandwich right now. So we're going to use these sympathetic nervous pathways to slow down that stomach activity. And that makes sense because, yeah, the sympathetic nervous system slows down digestion. So we're going to reduce that motility and secretion in the stomach. The chemical composition of the chyme that is coming into the small intestine is also then going to trigger cells in the wall of the intestine to release other hormones as well. We call them these enterogastromes. Okay, so entero, meaning we're talking about inside the body, kind of like endo, so within the body. And then gastromes, gastro, we're talking about digestion. Okay, so these are hormones that are going to be specifically related to digestion. Some of these enterogastrones, as they are secreted into the blood, travel all around the body and then get back to the stomach, are then again going to cause the stomach to reduce the motility and secretion that's happening there. So both of these mechanisms, nervous, using those sympathetic neurons, as well as our enterogastrones, are both going to be working to calm that stomach down, to slow down that motility and secretion. So now it's kind of like a back and forth push and pull between the gastric phase and the intestinal phase. The gastric phase is saying, look at all this bolus that's in here, and the wall of the stomach is stretched, and there's all these components in here, and we want to really ramp up motility and secretion and get this moving out into the intestines. So it moves a little spurt of chyme out into the intestines. And then the intestines say, whoa, 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 2 milliliters, like, come on, that's like a lot. Like, that's just the intestines over here. Calm down over there. So then the intestinal phase is the one that wins out. And slow down motility and secretion that's happening in the stomach. And then, as the intestines process that 2 or 3 meals that it has already, great, now it's not being stretched anymore. Now there's no chemical composition there to stimulate any of these activities. So then, which phase takes over again? Our gastric phase takes over again because we're not being inhibited anymore. And so now we say, oh, look at all this bolus, and we can secrete, and we can contract, and we move a whole bunch more over into the small intestine once again. And then the intestine say, whoa, slow down. Look at all this bolus now that's in this intestine. Okay, what do you want me to